Chapter 15 begins with Proverbs on speech in verses 1, 2, 4 and 7. There are more in verses 23, 26, 28 and even more in chapter 16. As we saw in the previous video covering chapters 11 to 12, speech is a major element of wisdom. Knowing when to speak and when to be silent, and appreciating the power of speech to cause great harm or to heal, inspire or advise is the mark of a wise person. For example, the Proverbs in 16:21 and 23 describe both the heart and the mind of the wise, that it is perceptive and judicious, and in both cases this means their speech is persuasive. Perhaps the wise man is being pictured as counselling a course of action, either in a moment of crisis or recommending a certain behaviour or lifestyle. In verse 24, pleasant words are like a honeycomb and bring health to both soul and body. But in verses 27 and 28, the speech of a scoundrel is like a scorching fire, and a gossip who whispers spreads strife and separates close friends. Verse 3 is a simple statement that the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, watching the good and the evil. There is no contrast between the first and second line, but we do have the typical binary division of the world into good and evil. Elsewhere it is the lazy and the diligent, the fool and the wise, the proud and the humble, and so on. Verse 11 echoes the same sentiment, that the Lord sees all. It is put very differently though. It begins with a statement that Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. There are some of those hidden realms in creation that no mortal can visit, like the roots of the mountains, the deep and the springs. Sheol and Abaddon are the grave or underworld, the realm of death, and so dread attends their mystery. But they are no mystery to God. Job 26:6 says the same thing. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. But this being so, it is much easier for God to see into the recesses of the human heart. As humans, we can all, to a degree, perceive the character and intentions of people we know really well. But none of us can look into Sheol. Therefore, the human heart is easier to read than the hidden realms. This proverb uses the familiar kal v'chomer, the how much more argument, to say that if God can see into the most hidden realms, then he can all the more easily see into human hearts. Nothing is hidden from him. As always with these proverbs, there is no word of application or exhortation, but the wise will ponder them. There are also a number of proverbs which compare the situations of those who are materially rich and poor, and which look at other factors to determine which is best. We have already seen one in 11:9. Better to be despised and have a servant than to be self-important and lack food. Here in chapter 15, there are three in verses 15, 16 and 17. In the last two, it is shown that poverty is better than riches if certain conditions obtain, which is the fear of the Lord and an environment of love. The first one, in verse 15, acknowledges that poverty is hard, but states that one's attitude to it goes a long way in enduring it. Perhaps the reverse is also true. Riches are great, but a bitter and miserable heart cannot enjoy them. In the end, your inner condition is more important for your life than your outer one. This is obviously also true when it comes to your relationship with God. Turning to chapter 16, the first four proverbs are related by the theme of providence or God's sovereignty. The first two are expressed as contrasts, but the second two are not. Verse 3 is a straightforward recommendation, but we are left to ponder the scope of these plans and what may happen if we do not commit them to the Lord. Does God care about everything, or only the big things? Or what is most important is a continual attitude of dependence, acknowledging that God decides what succeeds and what fails. Verse 8 contains another comparison of riches and poverty with the additional factors of righteousness and wickedness. The following proverb is another one about God's sovereign control. Then in verses 10 and then 12, 13, 14 and 15, we have 5 proverbs about kings. None of these are expressed as contrasts. Instead, they are expressed as parallels, the second line developing or expanding the first line. They speak of the ideal king, one who prizes and executes justice like God. A throne is established by righteousness. It is one thing to capture a throne by violence and cruelty, but if it is to last and become a long-lasting dynasty, there must be justice. Verse 14 states a simple fact, that an angry king can mean death is soon to follow. The king has absolute power like God, and so his favour is like the rains which prepare the soil for sowing. The appearance of Proverbs about the king is appropriate in this chapter, which has numerous expressions of God's authority. Verse 31 celebrates grey hair, which is a crown of glory earned through a righteous life. This is because God blesses the righteous, whereas the wicked are cut off early. A long life reflects wisdom, which guided it through many snares. Verse 33 ends the chapter the way it began, on a statement of God's sovereign control over everything.